So welcome everybody to the Maynard Finance Committee meeting for May 8th. It is 7:01. I'm going to call the meeting to order. And the first item on the agenda for this meeting is a public hearing for the annual town meeting that is happening next week. So Ken, remind me, do we need to take a vote to open the public hearing, or do I just open it and we vote to close it?
You just open it.
We just open. Okay, so I will go ahead and
Although
open.
Peter is here, you can ask him. He's a more esteemed former chair than I am, sir.
I believe we just open it, but then we vote to close it,
Yeah,
Peter. Is that correct? Okay, Greg's giving me the okay
I
on that.
guess so.
All right, so I will open the public hearing at 7:01. Couple quick announcements. This meeting is being recorded, so please be careful not to screen share anything you do not want captured in that recording. Also, since we are meeting via Zoom, any votes that need to be taken by the Finance Committee will be taken by a roll call vote. And I just need to confirm that all members of the committee that are present can hear me and participate remotely before we get started. So Ken Estabrook,
Yes.
Kevin Stone,
Yes.
Peter Campbell,
Yes.
Katie Moore,
Yes.
and and that's all we have on for FinCom right now. So what I'm going to do to get started is pull up the town meeting warrant, and we will go through all of the articles, and anyone that members of the public who would like to ask questions or give comment, just either raise your hand electronically, or if I don't see you with the screen share, feel free to just start asking. Please state your name and your address for purposes of our minutes. And here we go. So Article 1, I'm going to move through some of these pretty quickly because a lot of them are routine at annual town meeting, and we have several to get through. So town report acceptance, all boards, committees put in what they need to for what we did for the year, and then it's all put together in a town report. We do this every year, and then the town needs to vote to accept it. Any questions or comments? Okay. Moving on, Article 2 is obsolete equipment. Again, this is an article that happens every year. It is just to authorize the select board to dispose of surplus and equipment that we no longer need in the town, sale or dispose of them. Any questions on Article 2? Okay. Article 3, revolving funds. This is also one that we do every year. These funds have a maximum balance that can be spent out of them, and they are for these specific purposes that are outlined in this article. And then throughout the year, the monies can be drawn down, and it's a total appropriation of $400,000. Any questions on the revolving funds? Okay.
So just to clarify, that's actually not an appropriation.
You're right.
Alana.
I thought of
Yeah.
that as soon as I
Yeah.
said it. I was like, wait a second, that's not actually an appropriation.
It's just for funds for fees and stuff like that that would come in.
Right. Okay, Article 4. Now we get into some good stuff. Sarah, I see your hand raised. Is that for Article 3 or 4?
It is for number 4.
Okay, all right.
So
Let
I'd
me
like to go through it first.
I'll get started, and then and then I will call on you. So free cash is monies that the town has after the fiscal year. They get certified by the Department of Revenue, and then we are allowed to use them after that certification. We are generally using these funds for one-time use purposes. The exception to that is snow and ice deficit, which municipalities are allowed and encouraged to use free cash for. Otherwise, they generally go
Hmm.
toward
Okay.
stabilization funds, capital, things like that. And this year we had a little over $2 million, which is a good amount of free cash. The recommended amount from the Department of Revenue is, I might get this right, it's 3 to 5%, I believe, of your overall budget. So we're in good shape for free cash. And these are the places that the select board and town administrator went to use them for. And then that's what we are voting on. We do not have the FinCom comments done on this yet. We're going to do that a little later tonight. We have a couple more comments just to finalize before we put them out for everyone for annual town meeting. However, I can let you know that the Finance Committee did vote on this at our last meeting. And it was a vote to not recommend, with the count being 4-2 on that one. So I will open it up to questions. Sarah, please go ahead.
Okay, Sarah Perpetuitz, 23 Marlborough Street. My first question was about election poll pads. What are they? Why are they $12,000?
Sure, those are I think they're iPad, they're tablets that are going to be used for town elections on election day at the voting sites.
So how
Yeah, I
many
was just gonna point out,
iPads does
Alana, I
you
was
get
just
for
gonna point
12,000?
out that,
Hold on one second, Sarah. Go ahead. Kat.
Alana, I was just gonna point out that Greg is on here if you need to get any additional detail.
Yeah. Sarah, what was your follow-up question? And then
How
we'll see if
many
Greg can help out.
iPads do you get for $12,000?
Good question. Greg, do you want to fill in a little bit more detail on that one?
I don't know how many iPads. I can see if I can look up if I have the initial request, which probably outlined it. I don't know how many we'll get. I mean, enough to cover the precincts. So this is not an uncommon modern approach to election. Instead of like the volumes of papers. I happen to live in Acton. We've been using election poll pads for a couple of years now, and it just happens. It's just faster and more efficient.
Okay, and the technology as the iPads age and break, because that's what happens with computers. What do you have a budget to replace them every 5 years or whatever?
We will. So this is for
Okay.
for the initial.
And because I'm just thinking that the iPads have to be more expensive than the paper. So that's my comment there. My second question was about the Public Works leaf vac truck. Is that something that would be used just for like sucking out drains, or is there a plan for leaf pickup to have the truck come along and suck up residents' leaves like they do in, say, Framingham?
Madam Chair, do you want
Yeah.
me to answer?
I don't remember hearing about additional services with it, but you go
No.
ahead, Greg.
So we've had a leaf vac truck for however many, probably long time. Most towns do. It's rare that a town will do residential leaf disposal, collection, whatever the case is. So this is for a relatively minor amount because our insurance covered the rest of it. There was a fire in the leaf vac truck when it was sucking up, I think it was the leaves on Memorial Park, and so it so we need to replace it. So we primarily use it for parks, for public space. It's not that large, so its capacity is just not that great, and so we don't offer residential collection.
Okay, all right, that's the end of my questions there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Justine, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to double check and say to Greg more as far as the poll pads are. I'm not necessarily, I'm concerned that if we just refer to it as iPads, that's going to get lost in the messaging of what that actually is, because I'm assuming that there's software, there's a whole plan that's purchased,
Yeah.
There's probably a subscription, there's there's a whole lot to that, as opposed to just buying like 5 iPads. So, because I don't want it to look like we're asking for $12,000 for like 5 iPads.
No, it's more like an initiation cost for this, for basically a startup cost for for this investment in approaching this new approach not new to us, but modern approach to election record. So let me well, y'all can keep talking. I'm going to see if I can find like the more information.
Sure. Any other questions from those joining us on this article? Would any of the finance committee want to say anything about this article in particular?
Mike, go ahead, Alana. And,
Sure, go ahead,
speak
Kevin.
to this. So we voted 4-2 to not recommend this article. The reason being is because $257,599 of this free cash originated from Maynard Public Schools circuit breaker funds, which are state funds that help reimburse and defray the cost of special education services that Maynard Schools provides to Maynard students. Due to an influx of pandemic relief funds, the Maynard Public Schools did not spend all the circuit breaker funds allocated for fiscal year 2022. So these funds were returned to the town's general fund as free cash. Rather than spend that $257,000, so the reason the finance committee did not recommend this article was that rather than spend the entire $257,599 to return those monies to the schools to be spent on special education services that intended, this article proposes to return only $137,599. And so I think the people that voted to not recommend felt like it would be more appropriate to return the full amount of the circuit breaker funds back to the school via a special education stabilization fund. And that would be a more appropriate use of those funds.
Thanks, Kevin. Justine, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just had one more question. Speaking to Kevin's explanation. So it looks like the schools are going to get $272,599 of free cash back. If you add up the district flooring, the teacher device refresh, the Corey phone system, the district operations, and the special education stabilization fund. So, and then the $50,000 for the bleachers planning and design. So it's it's over $300,000 as opposed to the $257,000 that they turned over to free cash.
But you're mistaking two purposes there. Those items that you listed are capital improvements that went through the capital planning committee. What we're talking about is the need to address special education and the whipsawing of special education funding and need. So the state is projecting that special education expenses are going to increase 14% this coming fiscal year. And so what we've seen is a whipsawing effect, and only by a quirk of COVID and the way the law is structured, did these funds even roll into free cash. And so I think the line that would be most in line with the intent of this funding would be to return those funds to a special education stabilization account. This is what other towns have done. Lexington Town Meeting voted to approve a very similar plan to what the FinCom has in mind as a possible alternative to this free cash allocation.
Bob, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Thanks. I guess my question is aimed at Greg. I was wondering, this might be news that's about less than a week old for you, but relative to some of the things that won't be able to be funded because of this delay now, at least, I don't know whether you could speak to what's the next step if town meeting does not approve this.
That's a good question.
Town meeting does not approve the free cash article, Bob, right?
Correct. Sorry. Yes.
Well, I got to pay my debts. So that's our debts, the peoples of Maynard's debts. And that's snow and ice right off the bat. Depends on where off the top of my head, usually that would be like a reserve fund thing, usually, if it's like, that might cover it. But I don't even remember how much is left in the reserve fund right now. I think a hefty amount, and I don't remember
200.
how much.
We've
So
only
they-
taken 50 out so far.
So I gotta solve the other 100 grand or so. I'm not sure. It's a good question. I don't know. A lot of these things, as you can see, are like not necessarily like urgent, within a month or so. Like we can probably get by for another couple of months without certain trucks or a police cruiser, but other things like this road and sidewalk repair, that might hurt us as we move into our summertime, and then the fall paving and sidewalk repairs, and we're doing traffic light intersection improvements at Concord Street, and we were hoping to have this as like to offset any additional costs. So oh, and I got to pay my prior year bills. So like there's like, yeah, there's some impact, but I think the big bill is that snow and ice.
Just to clarify for anyone, if this doesn't get passed, then, we can't obviously spend the monies. So what we would have to do is either wait for special town meeting or call another special town meeting in order to do another appropriation
Yep.
for the free cash in order to spend it.
Yep.
Natasha, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. I just a couple of things I wanted to just clarify. So if there's an amendment before this article or that amends this article and that passes, wouldn't that allow the money to be used?
Depends on the amendment, sure.
Right, okay. So I just wanted to say that's not a total, it depends on if there's an amendment brought forward before there's a vote. Then there is a possibility that the monies would be used in another town meeting, wouldn't be necessary. To Greg, there was a proposal that seemed viable that you had shared with the select board and the superintendent about a month ago about free cash, that was one of the scenarios was the 257 coming back to the school. That seemed viable at that time. Is that not viable? I know it's not preferred at the time, but it seemed like a viable option that you endorsed as a possibility, correct?
We're putting me in a weird spot here.
Okay,
Natasha.
that's a trick question. I just want to let you know that you did have one. But I'm sure that I'm not sounding something totally off base here. I know because it was deliberated at the select board meeting. They had a
Right,
couple of
and I worked-
conversations of free cash, and one of the scenarios was that the 257 that was going to go back to the school, and then there was certain lines that you had, I don't remember exactly the line that had to go back, but it did seem like a viable option that you presented, although it wasn't favorable, but it was viable, correct?
It was viable, but listen, one of my bosses is on and I work for them, so I'm going to defer to whatever they told me to do.
Okay,
No,
before-
I'm not saying it's, I'm not saying, I'm just clarify that there was an option that was deliberated previously.
Yeah,
That
in public. So
incorporated
those-
that, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
That was
it was at a
in public
budget-
and,
There was a budget
Uh-oh.
subcommittee meeting when it was first brought up, and then even you had recommended a potential like allocation of that $257,000, right, for two different funding expenses, whatever, and then so be it. So then that was discussed by the select board, and they deliberated for a long time, and then went back and forth. And yeah, so like I would defer to that public meeting. Like I offered my opinion at that time, but I deferred to the board.
Before we continue the discussion, I just want to say, since we're in a public hearing, Bob, did you state your name and address?
I did not. I'm sorry.
I know we're so used to chatting with you, but
I came
we're a
on
little
late.
formal tonight.
Sure, it's Bob McCarthy, 28 Tobin Drive.
Okay, great. And then Justine, before I get to you, Peter, did you have something to say?
I did, if I could, just one thing. I kind of wanted to defend Greg here and just note, I mean, Greg's not the decision maker. The board of select, or the select board, is the decision maker. Greg, I think, should be free to present a whole bunch of different scenarios and not, be held to, well, why didn't you pick the one that somebody particularly likes? So I just wanted to throw that in. It's not Greg's decision, it's the select board's decision. So.
Thank you. And Justine, you want to say something?
Sure, and do you need my address too? Probably.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Sure,
I guess
circle.
technically it should probably be everyone's, I think, even
Sorry
though
about
we,
that.
we know our select board members, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, so 2 Barrelini Circle. And I wanted to speak a little bit to that very quickly. Greg basically said most of it. We did deliberate on how that money as free cash could be allotted. And we did go back and forth through different cuts. There were things that weren't going to get funded. And we deliberated for a pretty long time for that particular meeting on this. And I thought we had heard from the schools that, they didn't want it all back into the special ed stabilization fund. So that's why we made it, we tried really hard to get it up to the 87, we gave them 50,000 for the stabilization, then the 87,000 for the district operations. And that got them to the 3%, which is what we had been talking about throughout our budget planning from, back in September. But that was, there were, I think Greg's proposal, actually is on board docs. So from that meeting, I don't have that particular meeting right in front of me right now.
Okay, thanks. And Kevin, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to point out that there is sufficient balance in the stabilization funds and the Maynard School District Operation Funds to largely get us to that 257. I think there's posted on a board docs the math that I did to work that out, but it is possible to give the schools the $257,000 that they would be satisfied with. They wouldn't get everything they would be asking for, but that you could satisfy the schools just by a simple reallocation of stabilization funds and school district operations. And again, the math is posted on board docs. It was from 2 meetings ago. You could go and see that math, but essentially we could give the schools what they need, avoid a contentious town meeting, and not impact any other spending item other than stabilization.
Well, and I just need to clarify, build on what Kevin is saying. This is not about satisfying the schools. This is about trying to get schools returns to the schools, monies that were supposed to be used for special education. They reverted back to free cash. We have a choice to return that to the schools to be used for this, to address the special education needs. And this all has to be said in the context of the fact that we are $515,000 short of the level service budget for the schools. And so the schools are taking a hit on the level service on their budget side. And at the same time, as Kevin pointed out, there's a projection that special education needs will likely go up. And so again, I just want to clarify, this is not about satisfying the schools, it's about getting the schools the resources they need to address the needs of our children.
Okay, Natasha, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify. So the feedback that I had earlier, I was asking Greg earlier, was more to the point of Bob's question about what would happen, or, if the monies were done. And it was just to point out that there was an option that seemed viable. It was in no way, I know Greg does not make the final say. It is the select board who does deliberate, but it was just a matter that there did seem to be a viable option that had been floated out there at one point. Whether that is the majority of folks feel like it, that was not what the issue was, but it did seem like there was a rough draft of something initially. And I do also want to mention that whether the schools, you're still going to have bills for things, whether you want to fund them or not. So when you talk about, psychological services, looking at the drivers that we have for the schools, not wanting to fund them doesn't mean the expenses go away. So that's just the reality of what is. These are not optional things that we're looking to do. These are we're talking about special education services, medical therapeutic services, psychological services. So I just want to point out the context of, there is a need to pay for snow and ice. There is also a need to pay for, special education tuitions that are going up that we're required to send students to. So, and I also wanted to mention, because it was brought up earlier, that the school committee would, or the school department would not be seeking any reserve funds. That was something that at one point had been mentioned as a possibility, but it was recently decided that was not necessary for this year.
Justine, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Sorry, I promise, last question on this.
That's okay.
So Kevin mentioned, and obviously I've never actually looked at FinCom board docs, so I'm not sure what that is.
Okay,
But the proposal.
just like yours.
Oh, excellent. It sounds like it comes out of, so the proposal would be to come out of either general or capital stabilization. Is that where that proposal was going to come from?
Yes.
Alana, if you give me a moment, I can go and dig up the spreadsheet that I did
Well,
Sure.
my primary question is that
Mhm.
I know through the last 5 years of working with the finance committee and budgeting, that the finance committee has spoken very adamantly against using any kind of stabilization funds for a lot of those. I know that I've had to personally advocate for the use of it for the roof for the school and for other things, because the finance committee, those are funds they don't want to touch. So I'm just curious if they've changed, if the philosophy has changed with that.
I can address that, Alana, if you want.
You can hold on one second. I
Sure.
will, and then you can do yours, because I was one of the dissenting. So I will share my opinion on that, which you are correct. In our financial policies, we do want to put money for capital stabilization and general stabilization as a rule. Also in our financial policies, we don't want to be using free cash as operations. This also gives some to the Maynard School district for operation costs. That's the 87,599. I think for myself personally, that one I was willing to go with in this year, but also taking out of this, stabilization, which we have withdrawn from in recent years, was like one too many for me. So you're not wrong in that the proposal that Kevin made did go against some of the financial policies that we generally keep in place. Go ahead,
Yes.
Kevin.
So I respectfully disagree about that statement. I think the special education cost escalations are an unforeseen, although are a unpredictable, although projected cost increase that falls in line with the exact role a stabilization account provides. I mean, the evidence is there that special education funding has whipsawed relative to the needs. We had a surplus during COVID, and now we're going to go into a deficit because of COVID. And so the use of a special education stabilization fund would be highly appropriate. In fact, as I mentioned before, other towns have found this also to be in line with their financial policies, and town meeting voted to approve similar actions that what I envision.
Well, and we're sitting here talking about returning the 257 that came out of the stabilization, out of special education, and returning it back to the schools for the use of that, for that purpose. And so it's not like we're giving additional funds. We're only proposing to return the funds that came in, and rather than sitting there taking the funds and using them somewhere else. I mean, this is
Right.
This is a little bit like, you see somebody drop some money on the ground, you don't pick it up and start using it as your own. It is something that should be returned to the schools.
Well, but that isn't generally how we do free cash broadly.
Well,
we don't
we don't generally get $257,000 from the school that we then decide to keep part of. Okay, so.
No, this was something that hasn't happened in prior years. But what I'm saying is, in general, where free cash comes from is often sometimes with unused funds from other departments. And we don't say, okay, this department didn't use this $6,000 here, so we'll just give them back $6,000 for this. generally, we get it all together. It's certified at the amount we have. And then we look at all of our needs across the town and we use it on, things that are one-time use. Natasha, go ahead.
I just want to mention that regardless of what I'm saying or the school committee is saying, look at other towns. We talk about our benchmarking communities, and Millis is one that it has been identified by DESE as a community that we look at. And looking at their information, they're getting $500,000 from their free cash this year. They're getting a 6% overall budget increase, and they're getting $400 from stabilization. And they're asking their town, they said next year, this is all a one-time solution because they're all faced with the same issue, a 14% increase that we've historically never seen regarding that expense. It's gone between maybe 2, 3, or 4%. It is unforeseen. And so I would ask that in that context, it's true. I on principle, yes, ordinarily we would not want to, you don't penny to every department that you get it back, but we're not in usual times when it comes to what we're looking at. And that's what we'd hope that that message would come across. Is we're faced with extraordinary circumstances, and with the limited capacity of not being able to raise our base budget, this is one of the other areas that doesn't impact the town voters, that allows for that mechanism. Hopefully it's maybe a 1 year. They don't raise it this much every month, so that's fingers crossed, but that would be the goal. So I would look at Millis. I was looking at a whole bunch of places this weekend. Littleton, 6%. So even Assabet, they're getting their overall is 12%, but they're getting 7 from us. So it's just not Maynard alone who's facing this type of crisis.
Okay, any
you.
other thoughts or comments on Article 4? All right. Article 5, fiscal year salary administration plan. This is another one that gets passed every year at annual town meeting. We did have to raise the part-time employees to $15 as that is required by the new Massachusetts minimum wages. And we raised the veterans agent salary 2%. Believe everything else is the same. Any questions on Article 5? Okay. Article 6, town general fund budget. This is another one that we are going to be finalizing our comments later on this evening, but I can let you know that it was the Finance Committee voted to approve this article 4-2 at our last meeting. So this is the general fund budget. We break it out into these categories every year. It's increasing. I don't have the exact number. I think revenue's up from last year a little over $1 million. And then we got to figure out how to spend it. And these is what we have. I don't know if I have anything specific. The education, Maynard education is lower than the school department had asked for. As Natasha said, Assabet is up a bit. Reserve fund, same as last year. Employee benefits are up percentage-wise and dollar amount, of course. Greg, do you have anything you'd particularly like to call out on this article?
No, because it's such a heavy topic. So I generally recommend that the public go to the town's website and go to the select board page, and then you'll find FY24, and you'll see the whole gambit of documents over the last several months that have been leading up to this article.
Okay. Questions, comments on Article 6? Anything from the Finance Committee on this one? Okay. Article 7, Maynard Public Education budget. So this article is sponsored by the school committee. Again, this is one that FinCom needed a little more time to deliberate on. We did take a vote on it at our last meeting. We voted not to recommend in a 4-2 vote, and we will be finalizing our comments on it later today. Overall consensus is that it was just a little hard to figure out how we could make this happen without, I guess, severe disruption would be a good way to characterize it.
Could I comment on?
Yeah, go
So
ahead, Kevin.
I just want to point out like why the vote between the free cash issue focused on the schools and why certain people changed their mind regarding Article 7. As you pointed out, like the reason being is that the on the face of it, as the article as written, the amount that the schools would the amount that the article is asking to fund in the budget was a bridge too far. I think many members felt like that the amount requested, we would not be able to find a funding source to be able to fully fund what's being asked in Article 7. I was actually one of the members that voted to recommend in the dissent. What I feel like is that we need to start having a conversation about additional revenue sources, including overrides, because the way the financial math is working out, if we continue to see these cost escalations, we as a town are either looking at a override or severe widespread service cuts.
Okay.
Not
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I thought you were done.
that would not just be limited to the schools.
Justine, go ahead. I see your hand up.
Hi, thanks. I just wanted to clarify that the way that this is written, and I think the school committee is aware, but the way that this is written would give the schools an additional 22,744,577 if the 22,229,735 passes. So I'm just curious if there's a plan to change that on the floor, or if you're, I just want to make sure that somebody is aware that that's actually what we probably would be held to, which would be doubling the school's budget.
Huh. I think that was actually kind of news to me. Thanks. Thanks for that. Natasha, I see your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that was actually news to the school committee until about a week and a half ago as well. That I don't know if it was, I don't know when, but that Lisa, town council opined recently, which Greg shared, that if the order of the vote, the way it is, it would be one vote and then the other would have to be potentially reduced. So, so we haven't deliberated, we haven't had a chance to regroup and deliberate on that matter, but the school committee does have a workshop tomorrow, and that is the plausible outcome, that an amendment on the floor to reduce it to the difference would be the consideration.
Okay.
Or it's always a possibility that it would be withdrawn. So I don't know how the school committee will want to proceed, but
All right. Any other comments or questions on Article 7? Moving on. Article 8. Transfer ambulance receipts. So we have an ambulance program with our fire department, and it brings in certain revenue when we go out on ambulance calls. And we use this revenue to pay for the ambulance and the equipment and the things that we need for that program. So this is an article to transfer the sum that you see there, $194,555.26, and mostly going toward lease payments, which we voted to enter into, I think, 5 years ago. So that's the purpose of this one. Any questions or comments? Right, Article 9. So we have several town charter articles. I highly recommend that everybody go to the links that are listed here. I also want to just say thank you to the Town Charter Committee. This has been a really long process, I think 18 months, something like that, maybe 2 years. So Bill Coleman, the chair, thank you so much, and everybody that served on that committee. They did a really thorough job, and I greatly appreciate the way that they presented the changes on that site. Again, that is here in the warrant, and you can click on it if you're online. That shows the sort of redlined version, so you can see the changes or see just the new one. They did a very thorough job. It's really wonderful, and thank you all so much for putting in all the time. So we'll go through these and let me know if you have any questions on any of them. The first one is Article 1, and this one had some minor changes. I don't think there was anything particularly big in this, in that Article 1 change. And then Article 10. Trying to make sure I remember all the sponsor comments are helpful. This was some formatting, and this one actually impacted the Finance Committee. In the charter previous, or the current one, if you were on the Finance Committee and you wanted to run for another office, you had to resign the day that you pulled papers for that process. You couldn't wait until you saw if you actually got elected or not to leave the Finance Committee. And that can be kind of disruptive. So this changes that so that the member of the committee can run for another office and would only need to resign should they be elected to that office at that time. So that was kind of a substantial change for this one. Any questions on that? Okay. Article 11, elected officials. This one has a new section about resignation and that process. Couple other smaller changes. I don't think anything particularly substantial other than that. Taking out some dated language. And Article 12. This one concerns the town administrator, and if we have a temporary appointment or an acting town administrator due to a leave of town administrator or something of that nature. Previously, a acting town administrator could only do temporary appointments. They couldn't do any permanent appointments. And sometimes things take time to get in new staff and whatnot. And sometimes, it would be better if the acting town administrator could also do permanent appointments while they are the acting town administrator. So that was a relatively substantial change for this one. Any questions on that? And it also made the renewal for temporary appointments longer. Okay. Article 13, amending Article 5, administrative organization. This one moved some things around. I don't think. Trying to remember if this one had anything particularly substantial. A lot of the charter work is making sure things still make sense, they flow correctly, they have updated language, you know, there are things that, you know, would no longer occur just due to, you know, moving into the future. Article 14 is for Article 6, finance and fiscal procedures. This one talks about the developing of a long-term financial projection, which Finance Committee is certainly on board with. Other than that, I think that's pretty much it for that change. Article 15 is to amend Article 7. Again, this one is a lot of sort of formality, some gender neutrality in the definitions. Nothing of particular procedural change, I don't believe. And then Article 16 is to amend the charter introduction. Just background and purpose of the charter. It includes the fact we have an updated master plan and the fact that the last time we updated the charter was 2013 instead of what was in there previously, which was 10 years before. Things of that nature. And then omnibus changes refers to, you know, general small corrections in typographical errors, grammatical errors, things like that, which they always go through and do. Again, painstaking work, and thank you so much to the Charter Review Committee. And those are all the town charter articles. Are there any questions or comments from anyone concerning, I can go back through any of them, particularly any of the town charter articles? Okay. Article 18, Water Enterprise Fund Budget. So at annual town meeting, we have to approve our general town budget. We also have 2 enterprise fund budgets that we have to go through. One is the water, one is the sewer. And this is the proposal for the water fund budget for this fiscal year. And also I encourage anyone who has questions about the water and sewer rates and the budgeting process. If you go to the DPW's website, they have posted the slides that they present to the select board. You can also go and look at the meeting, but I wasn't sure what date exactly that was presented, but it is on the DPW's website, so you can go and look there. Because a lot of this is, you know, long-term planning and setting the rates having to do with what we need to do in the upcoming years. Any questions on Article 18? All right. Article 19 is wastewater treatment facility operations. So we don't have the capacity in-house with our own staff to service our wastewater treatment facility. And the the DEP, Massachusetts DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, has pretty strict requirements for how many people are there, what they're doing. They don't want you to, you know, skimp and have bad things happen to the water. So we go through a process for a contract to have some of this taken care of. And this is just a article to allow for contract negotiations for 3 to 7 years. And I believe any contract the town enters that's over 3 years has to be voted on at town meeting. So that's why this is coming to you all as a vote. So the select board is the acts as the water and sewer commissioners, but there are certain things they can do and certain things they cannot do without town meeting approval. One of them is a contract longer than 3 years. Any questions on Article 19? Article 20 is the sewer enterprise fund budget. Just like the water, this one's the sewer. And again, encourage you to check out the DPW's slide presentation on water and sewer. Any questions on Article 20?
It's probably worth just pointing out for, since we have so many
Mhm.
guests online, that the enterprise funds essentially are separate budgets for the water system, for the sewer system. And so rather than those going through the town budget, this is paid, the money that comes in is paid for by the rates. Water that goes out is spent on the water system. Same for the sewer one. So this is just setting up separate budgets for those two funds. I just wanted to
Yep.
provide that elaboration.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay. And then Article 21, water retained earnings transfer for water enterprise reserve fiscal year 2024. So just as Ken mentioned that these are separate funding mechanisms and they, water comes in first, water, revenue comes in for water and is used for the water system. They have what they call retained earnings, which is basically the same as our free cash. And they, Justin would like to use some of their retained earnings, basically some of the enterprise funds as free cash, to set up a reserve fund, much like we do in our free cash. If you see, there's a line for reserve fund to be expended during the year for unanticipated, emergency spending. The reason for doing this is that once it is in the out of the retained earnings and in a reserve fund, it can be spent throughout the year with select board and finance committee approval rather than another town meeting vote. Anything that is spent out of retained earnings needs a town meeting vote. So this is to expedite for emergency purposes, 500,000. And again, if it's not spent, if there are no emergencies, whatever's left from this 500,000 will go back into retained earnings. Any questions on that? And this is also, again, likely to become a relatively procedural article. And so then sewer retained earnings transfer, same idea, just going for $200,000 for a sewer reserve fund for the year to be spent for emergency purposes. Article 23, water enterprise retained earnings transfer for capital improvements. So as I said, if the enterprise fund wants to use its retained earnings, it has to go before town meeting voters to use that. And so this article is asking for 90,000 from that retained earnings to replace a truck. Much like our free cash has things like capital and improvements in it. And sorry, any questions on Article 23? Okay. Article 24, sewer retained earnings transfer for Summerhill Road sewer capital improvements. So there were some sewer infrastructure issues on Summerhill Road, and this is taking money again out of the retained earnings for the sewer and using the sum of $120,000 to improve that bit of the infrastructure that has been causing problems on Summer Hill Road. Okay. Article 25. Sewer enterprise retained earnings transfer for wastewater treatment facility capital improvements. Once again, this is coming out of the sewer portion of retained earnings. And it's going to be, this is to help with a grant that was awarded, and a lot of grants that you get, they ask for participation, so they don't just give you the full amount and of what the project is. They'll, want to split it with you. So we got a grant award of $89,775. And then they are asking, in order to get that grant, that you also put in, looks like roughly about the same amount. So that is what this article is asking for. Yes, Sarah, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
It's not so much a question about the content, but about the language. What does it mean to curve long-term operational costs?
Let's see. I think what it means is we're trying to use this grant to help, repair and replace some of our equipment, so that we're not spending more on doing those repairs or replacing in the future. Sometimes when you put things off and it gets worse, then it's more expensive to fix it later on.
Right. Okay, so I would have said curb rather than curve,
Oh,
because I'm picturing
Yeah,
something that's a
sure.
curly Q. So, okay. All right. Thank you.
no problem.
The author recognizes your recommendation, and I will try to do better next time.
Okay, Article 26. Okay, so this one also had a question submitted to us. So I want to make sure I go through that as well. But this is an article to transfer from Cemetery Perpetual Care Trust $50,000 for maintenance and operations in the cemetery. So the way that the Perpetual Care Trust works is you cannot spend from the trust itself. You need to take monies out of that trust and put it into the expenditure account, the Perpetual Care expenditure account, in order to be able to actually use some of those funds. So in this case, the 50,000 is going into the expenditure account and is to be used for the DPW to help care for the cemetery grounds. This is generally what the Cemetery Perpetual Care Trust is for maintaining the cemetery. There have been years in the past where all of that maintenance and care has just come out of the DPW operating budget, but that is very hard for the DPW to pay for out of its operating budget with all of its other needs. And so this is to take some of that monies from the Perpetual Care Trust in order to expend it on the care of the cemetery. And let me,
Madam Chair, can I say something? So I apologize for this not getting to the Finance Committee much sooner, but after we published this warrant, which you read correctly from, my temporary or current, I don't know, but I had to hire a finance director, assistant, and town accountant. His name is Andy Gould. Andy looked at the warrant and he had a different recommendation. So instead of the Cemetery Perpetual Care Trust, he recommended to take it from the sale of lots. And he cited Mass General Law. It doesn't really matter. No one's going to write it down. But I looked it up just to double check. Chapter 140, section 25, which says the sale of lots is that's what it's more appropriate than his recommendation in accordance with that particular law to use the sale of lots. So you're absolutely right in your description. And so what what I had to do in the PowerPoint presentation, which will be in the script for town meeting, according to town council and Dick Downey's recommendation, is to just change from cemetery perpetual care trust to sale of lots. So
Okay.
there's 3 accounts, as you said, the cemetery perpetual care trust, the expendable perpetual care trust. So you're right, we don't spend out of the perpetual care trust, but we do spend out of the expendable perpetual care trust, and from time to time we transfer into the expendable care trust if we find we need it. And then the third account, which is this sale of lots. So there's like $120,000 in that account. And I really appreciate the finance committee doing the due diligence of listing how much is in that account. So the $50,000 is going to be recommended to the select board to have the motion say vote to transfer from sale of lots.
Okay, and the sale of lots is similar in that you don't spend from it directly, you have to put it into the
transfer it
expenditure
out.
account.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well, you might be able to expend directly from it. It's not like it's not the same.
it's not the
same-
trust.
It's not a
Right.
trust in that sense.
Okay,
My understanding is, of course, we do need town meeting approval to transfer out of that account.
Right.
It has to be a very deliberate act. So I will send you, Madam Chair, the information I just said, which is
Okay.
in the little blurb I just wrote up for the select board to read, and I'll just send it to you.
great, I appreciate it.
Yep.
Lee, go ahead.
Yes, hi, Lee Karras, 32 Great Road. My questions were, well, first of all, I've been the chair of the tree committee for the last couple of years, and I've been the secretary of the historical commission for a number of years. I care very much about Glenwood Cemetery. It's our only National Register property in the town. And I also agree that the cemetery really needs funds to care for its gravestones, care for its pond, care for its trees. And so my questions were not about trying to limit funds that were going toward cemetery maintenance in any way, but I was just trying to understand how the perpetual care fund worked. And my limited research and understanding of it was that the principal had to stay intact, and that it was only the interest earned in the trust that could be used. And that if there was a trust, there were trustees, and those trustees are the cemetery commissioners, who are our select board. And, so why was it, if that was the source of funding that was being transferred, why it had to go to town meeting? And then if it was correct that it did need to go to town meeting, knowing what the $50,000 was made up of, how much was interest, how much was principal. But I guess now all of this is moot, given that the transfer is coming out of a different bucket.
Well, not entirely moot, and I will answer your first question, which is, yes, it would still need town meeting vote, much like for the water and sewer, where the select board is the commissioners of the water and sewer enterprise funds, but they still need town meeting vote to do things like take monies out of the retained earnings. So you're correct that the select board is the trustees, but they still are not allowed to do everything without town meeting vote. So does that clarify that a little bit?
Right, as opposed to if you were a trustee of a private trust, this is a public trust.
Right.
Okay, I see that distinction.
Right. Yeah. And then your second question, you're correct, I think is answered by the fact that we are not going to take it out of the care trust. We are going to take it out of sale of lots instead.
But can you tell me what the $50,000 would have been made up of? Interest and
In
principal.
terms of interest or principal for the trust?
Mhm.
It might have been interest, but I don't want to say that wrong. I will look it up for you, Lee, because I'm not I don't look at cemetery stuff all that often.
Well, I know, nor do I.
No, this is a good question. We just don't, we don't do this that often, but I don't know. And if maybe Justine St. John, if she's still on, she works a little closer to cemeteries than I do.
I wouldn't want to speak to this. I don't know. Off the top of my
Okay,
head.
I'll look it up.
Okay.
I'll look it up.
Okay,
Okay.
I thought it was that the perpetual care trust law structure, or whatever, however you want to say, I thought it was a state type of entity, in that the state had requirements of how it was done, and that it could only be the interest that was, I mean, if you took principal, you're not going to end up, you know, if that happens repeatedly, you're not going to have any perpetual care fund anymore. And the good people who paid into it to keep their family plots in good shape will have been done wrong.
Yeah, and that
There's
it could,
definitely- Sorry, Lana.
go ahead, Justine.
I was gonna say, there are definitely provisions regarding the perpetual care trust of parts that cannot be spent. But I just don't have the breakdown of it.
Oh, sure.
Okay. Glenn, I see your hand up. Go ahead. Just state your name and address for us, since it's your first time speaking.
I had to unmute myself first. Glenn Koenig at 10 Charles Street. I just wanted to know, for the future, what's the situation with lots in the cemetery in general? In other words, as you sell them, how close are we to capacity? How much of these sales are going to continue on from year to year?
That is a good question. And I know, you know, there isn't unlimited space, obviously. But I
don't know
don't
off the
think
top of
we're
my head.
quite, yeah, I don't think we're quite at the point where we're overly concerned. But I do think
it is a concern for the horizon.
it's yeah,
We will run out of space.
Sure.
And we've looked at the land in the surrounding areas. We even when St. Bridget's was there, you know, they sort of like kind of removed themselves to a degree from the community. They're just not as direct anymore downtown, but they were, I can't remember right now if they put their cemetery up for sale, or maybe I'm just thinking the back half. There was like this back third. If you could drive to the back of St. Bridget's, there's like you can see where it just stops, like the roads, and then it just becomes like weeds. And I think they were selling that. I'm trying to remember. But Justin DeMarco, the director of Public Works, and I, and a couple of other team members, we were looking at all those lots just to see what was it like. It's kind of a tricky area back there because it's all the water, and then it kind of abuts other houses as you kind of go further back. But we've been looking at that. And then eventually, and we're not unique in this situation, of course, like people are born, people are dying. And it's going to come down to, we might have to move to, this probably, I'm having a brain. Is it called a crematorium? What's it called when, is it?
yeah, we were
Columbarium.
looking, yes.
It's a columbarium.
Columbarium,
Yeah.
excuse me, thank you.
So it's a place where you can put the remains from
I mean,
being
that's
cremated in
that's
a
stuff
nice
that's got to be explored in the next
visiting space.
in the next couple of years. Like that's the sort of investments we're gonna have to look into. Yeah, but I don't off the top, unless if it's not on the town's website already, because Justin and the rest of the Public Works, they tried to put information onto the town's website. So I would check there first, and if it's not there, you can shoot me or Justin an email and ask that question.
Is that a thing where you'd have to actually construct a building to serve that
Yeah,
purpose?
it's usually stone or other, you know, I've been to several. I don't know what we're planning, but yes, and it has, you know, places for people's remains.
Yeah.
And plaques and, you know, things like that, and you can go and visit it, and some of them are quite
And
beautiful.
and the cost of that would still be within the world of the cemetery fund.
Yeah, you would still have to
family
pay.
funds.
Yep. You would have to pay to have your, yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
That'd be a significant
Oh.
like initial investment just to build it. So
Right.
I doubt that the cemetery funds, I mean, if we're asking to transfer just a regular operating at this point, then I don't think we're going to have probably a significant amount of money to build a columbarium. Did I say that right? I hope I just did. Thank you, Justine. So then,
It's a new term to me too, yeah.
yeah. And in which case, you know, it would be the usual model will probably be free cash transfer otherwise. So But that's probably the limit of my cemetery knowledge, so I'll probably stop.
Okay, I'm just a, long-term thinker, and that's why the question came up, because I
Great question.
did
Sure.
live in Arlington for many years, and their space went down to the edge of the Mystic Valley Parkway, and then there was the Mystic Ponds, and there was nowhere for it to go. So the limit was pretty clear at that time.
Yeah. Lee, go ahead.
I'll be very brief.
Yeah.
This question, I think it did come up at the time that Greg was talking about touring the vacant portion of St. Bridget's, and Justin actually did a calculation of how many spots were still available and that sort of thing. And if it is on the DPW website, he certainly has it available. It's not something he'd have to recreate.
Great, thank you. And Justine, you have your hand up?
I was going to say something fairly similar. I just wanted to make sure that people were aware that this is on our radar as cemetery commissioners, that at least it is definitely on my radar, that we know that there is a space concern, and we are having conversations with Justin regarding it. As far as columbariums go, it doesn't necessarily, I just wanted to clarify for Glenn, it doesn't necessarily have to be a building per se with 4 walls. A lot of times it's more of, it looks almost like a wall, and then you put the cremated remains inside, the individual doors. So it's not, it's definitely an investment, but it's not an investment as far as you're going to have to build a 4-walled structure with a roof. You could have other ways to make that work. So there's definitely a lot of different options when it comes to those.
So as long as it doesn't look like Horn and Hardart, right?
Exactly. No, it'll be, I'm imagining there will be a public process when that comes about. But I'm sure we'll take as much input as we can for that.
So, but there are little compartments essentially in which people's remains
Yeah.
can go. That's very interesting. All right. So it saves you a lot of cost that way to do it in that manner, it seems.
Yeah.
Space for
Okay.
sure, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to Article 27, disposition of 1 Summer Street. So this is our old fire station lot, and this article is allowing for the select board to sell that property. Although we do not yet have, Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, we had an RFP out, and we have a real estate agency working on it, but we do not yet, this is in anticipation of having a contract, but we don't yet have.
We don't have a
buyer.
They came in today, actually.
Oh, well,
so
hey.
You're absolutely right. We were working with a broker, O'Brien Commercial Properties, and because I was here with sick babies, I didn't see how many came in, but the deadline was noon, and tomorrow
great.
we'll be opening them and evaluating them. So fingers crossed, we got some really good ones. But this, as you said, Madam Chair, this just authorizes the select board to sell the property. So yeah, the idea was to time the RFP so that we could go to town meeting having like a pretty good sense of what the potential reuse is going to be. I feel really good about it anyways. I've been working with some residents, and I'm pretty confident that Brian has done a good job of showing it. So I think it's exciting either way. Whatever the use is, it's not recommended to be used for municipal use anyways. So it should go to, my opinion, it should go to a private developer.
All right, well, we look forward to hearing more on that. Any questions on this article? Okay. Article 28, special stabilization account, purpose definition. So at a previous special town meeting, we approved an article for use of what was this? Greg,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, no, it's
I'm
okay.
having a brain.
No, no.
Was this from the marijuana?
Yes, so,
Monies? Okay.
so, no, no. So the marijuana establishments in town, of which we have
Yes.
two, right now, they have a, what's called a host community agreement with the town, you know, as ratified by the select board. And in it is two payments to the town, one through taxes and the other one through what's called the community impact payment. So those, you know, it's a very highly regulated industry right now at the state level as well. And so, but either way, so the town approved when that community impact payments are collected, they're put into, we established a stabilization account so that it could be very transparent. And since then, the board has approved a policy for the use of those funds known as the Cultural District Enhancement Fund. I think it's CDEF. And so if you go to the town website, you can find that. But Department of Revenue is still trying to figure it out. And they had said that, and it's extremely subtle, the difference of this line of the purpose of this fund shall be community improvements, including but not limited to infrastructure improvements, beautification to cultural digital programming, like that. So the original wording a couple of years ago submitted to the Department of Revenue is nearly identical, but there was something, and I don't even remember what it was. There was something the Department of Revenue said didn't fit their definition for how it's reported and accounted for. And so that's why it requires this clarification.
Okay. So this is generally just a housekeeping article, but I just wanted to make sure everyone understood the original one.
That's it.
Yeah. Any questions? Okay. Article 29, Maynard Golf Course receipts transfer. So we have a golf course and it is managed by Sterling Golf Management, and there is a certain amount of money that comes in as revenue, and we use that to then make improvements on capital improvements for that property. We are currently building up a fund to work on roof repairs. And so this is an appropriation of $56,000 to go into that capital improvement account for the roof on the golf club. So again, this money is not an additional tax on Maynard residents. It comes from the golf course management. Any questions on that? Okay. Article 30, Community Preservation Fund budget for this year. So the Community Preservation Fund comes from an additional bit on your tax bill that we voted to be a CPA community many years ago. And this appropriation is the $134,700. That's the first, I think 3 lines there for administrative and operating expenses, and then long-term debt, principal, and interest. The other 4 lines that you see there are what's anticipated to be collected and goes into 4 different reserves, which are then appropriated from those reserves. So sometimes this article looks a little confusing because you see the total budget of $450,000. The only appropriation in this particular article is those first 3 lines. And then the next article will have more, will appropriate some from those reserves. If that makes sense. Any questions? Okay. So here is the article for appropriations for this year, and the Community Preservation Committee is charged with overseeing a process where they get applications from either boards or citizens themselves or some staff members for projects that they would like funded with Community Preservation Act monies. And then they go through them and they have a process to deliberate about them. And then they bring forward the ones that they have approved for the year for town meeting voters to weigh in on. So these are theirs for this year. It's a deposit into the Maynard Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And it's a membership fee, that next one, for the Regional Housing Service Office. We've been doing that. We've been members of that for a few years now, and found it very helpful. That can be a daunting process, some of the housing processes. Then we have Concord Circle door replacement project, and a deposit into the Conservation Trust Fund. Rio Road Playground Design Phase 1. And they go into a little more detail about that. And also all of these applications for projects can be viewed. I believe the Community Preservation Committee has all of them up on their website if you want to see more details into the projects themselves. And then they have, the last one on here is a maximum amount of $200,000 for 75% of the soft cost, excluding project management costs, of the Alumni Field bleacher design project. So this is part of our ongoing funding sources, finding funding sources for the Alumni Field bleacher project. And this is what the CPC is going to put towards that project. And there's a little more, they do give you a little more discussion in their sponsor comments about it as well. Are there any questions or comments on this article? Okay. Article 32, prior year bills. So sometimes we have bills that for whatever reason don't end up getting paid in the fiscal year of which they were incurred. So when that happens, it has to go to town meeting to appropriate funds to pay those bills because it is not in the year in which we are operating. If you notice, this amount that is needed for these bills is also in the free cash article, because that is where we were going to get the money to pay these bills. So we have to both say, yes, we need to pay these bills, and also where it's coming from. In this case, it's coming from free cash. And these are, you know, some are a little bit interesting. The Eversource one for Crowfield, but you know, the town has done some due diligence on why these happened, and you know, we don't anticipate any of these happening again. Any questions or comments on which number? 32. Sarah, go ahead.
I'm just curious, how did the Eversource bill go missing for that long without the town knowing what was going on?
It's a good question. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Greg. I know we discussed it, but I don't.
Madam Chair, so they never submitted it to us. They did. Eversource must have done an internal audit and then found that we were being delinquent, or we or somebody was being delinquent on not paying those bills. I don't know if they were sending it to. I really don't know. I don't know who they could have been sending it to. But then, however many months ago, we got this bill saying that it hadn't been paid in however many years.
At least, are they waiving interest fees on it and penalties because the bill was not sent to the right place? Because this seems overly ridiculous on their part.
That's true. And I can't speak to if that's true because it's been months since I've seen those bills. But I would agree with you, and knowing me, I probably asked that exact same question. So I can't say.
We did ask town council, I believe, to be sure that we weren't like out of some realm of statute of limitations or other such things. And the advice was like, nope, sorry, you got to pay it.
You got to pay it. Yep.
Okay, but you have petitioned Eversource to say it's your fault for not sending the bill to the right place, so we're not paying the penalties and extra fees.
Yeah, I probably did say that, but I suspect I don't have legal standing not to. If we used it and we have, and by being a user of any utility, whether it be gas, electric, or otherwise, there's an agreement that you have with that company as to the terms of that use. And if there's penalties assigned to the late payments, there's very little you can do if you're delinquent and the town was found to be. So
Well, if they neglect to send the bills to the right place, is there any recourse there?
right, but I would have to sue them. So I wouldn't recommend that we expend council monies.
Right, okay. I would be on the phone with them, yelling at them, but that's
Sure.
me. That's,
Sure.
Any other comments or questions on that article? Okay, moving on. Article 33, citizens petition, recommend new elementary school operate without fossil fuels. After review from town council, this article is an advisory article, meaning that should it be voted in, it is a recommendation, but it is not a requirement that the select board must design and build the new Green Meadow Elementary School without fossil fuels. So I just wanted to let everyone know that ahead of time. But that it's a pretty simple article otherwise. Are there any questions or comments on this article?
Roger Stillwater.
Oh, sure. Hold on, Roger. 1 second. I see Glenn's hand up and then I'll get to you after him. Okay. Go ahead, Glenn.
Just to be clear though, so the building itself
Mhm.
is under the control of the select board as it's a capital town expenditure and it's separate from any school department funds. Is that correct?
Separate from any school department.
What's the new elementary school? Is that your question? Is the
Yeah.
new elementary school? Well, so the select board represents the town as the owners. But the school department is responsible for the maintenance and upkeep and well-being of the school district and their occupants. But in this regards, it's referring to new construction, and so it really is a collaboration. Yes, the select board might be the ones who sign the contracts at the end of the day, but as evidence or like as reflected by the school building committee, which is comprised of both school committee, select board, and a number of at-large residents, it really is combined. Like the select board in the years I've been working with the board members, unless I'm forgetting an instance, they defer to the school committee when it comes to like the designs and operations of the school district as they should. And so-
Okay, that makes
yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just, but so the funds to pay for the new building
Mhm.
come from either the state or the bond issue, not out of any funds from the school department otherwise. Is that correct?
That's true. So yes, so it comes from you're exactly right, those two sources. So general tax collection, which pays for the bonds issued, borrowed, and then in most cases, the state.
Okay, so because the town is one single entity, it's not like the town leases the building to the school department. It's all
Right.
used and collaboratively built. But the school department funds are used for its own operations, and any capital out of the school department is used for other capital equipment that the school department has to use, but not the building itself.
I think it's worth, Glenn, I think you need to clarify. You're talking about two things. You're talking about building the school and you're talking about operations. You keep
Yes.
using that term operations. The annual operations comes out of the school.
Yes,
Out of the school budget, but you're also talking about building of the school itself.
yes.
So which one are you asking the question about?
No, I think I'm just trying to clarify what you just said. So there are two pots of money, and one pot of money is the town technically owns the building, if you want to call it that, because the money to pay to build the building comes from either state aid from the whatever, I forget the name of the department, or the bond issue. And that
Yes.
makes the building itself. And then the school department has some capital funds, but those are just for school equipment that has to be funded that way. And the rest of it's all operations on the school side, which pays teacher salaries and curriculum materials and all that sort of stuff, right?
Well, so it's a little more arcane than that because school buildings are actually school buildings. Okay, so yes, they're owned by the town, but they're designated as school buildings as opposed to as opposed to other buildings. So there are buildings that are schools. So for example, when when a school building is no longer used, it has to be released by the schools to the town. But that's a sort of an arcane issue. You're asking,
Okay.
if you're asking, the town builds the school.
Right.
And then the school system pays for the operations for that. That's a true statement.
And they also have to pay for the maintenance in this case as well.
That comes out of the school budget unless you're talking about a capital expense that may be. So for example, the bleachers, we're sitting here paying out of, we're purchasing bleachers for Alumni Field separately, separate and apart from that.
Oh, and so that again, the bleachers are a town expense to make them because they're a capital.
Yeah, but
thing.
you're asking a question that is separate and apart from the point of what this article is talking about. So you're asking a very good question, a larger question about how school budget goes into. We could spend meetings upon meetings talking about that. But
Okay.
if you're talking about this particular citizen's petition, that what you're asking about isn't germane to that.
Oh, okay. But I just was trying to get some idea in the background because during the meeting, I know having been in town meetings in other towns, the question might come up anyway, because as it is a school building, people may get confused about how the money's raised. And so I pretty much figured out that that's how it works, but I just wanted to clarify that with you. So
Yep,
thank you.
I agree. And also I do think it is important to note that however the school building is built, as we talked about, the maintenance of and the electricity bills and such would generally be under the purview of the school department. So their budget would have to, would be responsible for that.
Right. And I'm part of this question comes up for me because I was there and did a tour last week. And one of the things they pointed out was certain heating equipment in the classrooms had failed in a sort of catastrophic way during a very cold time in the winter. And they said that the units were too old, they didn't have spare parts, all that kind of thing. And so even though the town built the building, if the school department didn't have the money to replace those units in their entirety so they would, be able to work onwards, then they're falling apart. So, and that's part of the reason why we're building a new building is that sort of stuff has worn out. And so there's this kind of two different bodies that are responsible for maintaining it. So,
Right.
so the lack of maintenance on one side has an impact on the town's decision to replace the whole building on the other side. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you.
Natasha, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify. So the school has just jurisdiction over decisions that are made on their premises, Glenn. And that's where like the solar project that come out. So that's a collaborative effort. That's probably the one that comes to mind the most. So there is that strong collaboration, but the town wouldn't be able to come on to the school and change something without the schools, and I don't imagine that they would do that. But to your point about maintenance, a lot of it is just what you're funded, right? And how that works, because that's the town's monies. So if there's a maintenance issue, it's unforeseen, that it becomes a town issue,
Okay.
which is like those heaters that happened, the pipes froze and those broke over the winter. So that becomes a larger unforeseen issue.
Oh, I
just
see.
because of the age, and they're no longer, the building is old, it's end of life.
Okay, so looking to the future, which is more pertinent to the article we're discussing, then we still have this, the decision we make and how we build the building has an impact on the operating budget. And so
We have to commit to it, right? Exactly. So
Absolutely.
whatever you're committing to it.
right. And when we're talking about down the road operating costs to be balanced against initial costs. So the town is paying the initial costs of the equipment to put in there to run the HVAC system, whereas the schools are going to be paying for the electricity, or in the worst case, the fossil fuels after the building is built.
Seems about right. Natasha, you
Okay.
agree?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I
Yeah.
mean, it's really the town. I mean, we get allocated town, so it's really
Right.
the town. They help fund us. It's your tax dollars, all of us. So we are
Right.
just entrusted with maintaining it based on whatever allocation we end up getting once the building is, so then it becomes, but it does become under our purview to maintain in the long term. But it is supported by the town, because if there are unforeseen things or maintenance or new equipment, that's the dynamic of how that works.
Right. And so, what was I going to say? There is some monies also come from the state, which are earmarked just for schools. So it's not 100% town tax funded in that respect. But generally, most of the money that comes through the school budget is from town taxes, based on a previous article we discussed earlier.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Stillwater, go ahead. I see your hand up.
Yeah, so just to correct a small correction here. This is because this concerns the HVAC system. There are some other sources of money. So if we went with geothermal, there'd be a large tax rebate that would come in for the geothermal option, several $1 million. So a big, like 40% of the cost of the HVAC system. And then there's also some Eversource money that comes in. That's all I wanted to say on that. And I also wanted to thank the FinCom for supporting this initiative. I'm with the Maynard Climate Action Now, and that is putting up the initiative. And I appreciate FinCom supporting it. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions on Article 33? Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to comment a little bit on the finances. So based upon what was presented to FinCom by the school building committee, we were presented, of course, the geothermal option. We were presented the methane gas fired option. And they did cost projections, and in those cost projections, they did full life cycle analysis, discounted cash flow, very sophisticated model that I was very impressed with. I did point out some flaws in that meeting, but overall, I was impressed with that model. And based upon the school building's projections, depending upon those rebates that Mr. Stillwater touched upon, the total lifetime cost of the geothermal was comparable to the methane fired solution. The school building committee gave a high and a low, and the methane gas solution fall in between the high and the low cost projection of this. One thing that was missing from the school bidding presentation that I felt like needed to be addressed was the cost risk associated with methane gas. Methane gas is volatile, and those price fluctuations do have an impact on the cost and add some uncertainty to the cost of the methane fired solution that was not accounted for in the school building presentation. Overall, though, my reason for voting to recommend, while I do think the climate benefits are a huge value add, my primary reason is that I felt like the geothermal was financially beneficial for our town and was comparable to the gas, but also brought in less financial risk due to the reduced fuel cost volatility.
Thank you.
Right, we'll move on to Article 34. citizens petition to adopt a new municipal opt-in specialized stretch code. You can see the new code here, and then the old would be taken out down below there. This is again building codes for moving toward net zero energy buildings, and the finance committee understands that this is likely where things are moving towards, most likely, and at some point maybe the only, building codes that you can do. But we felt that it was a little early for us, and also that the expertise of how, we weren't quite clear on all of the impacts, financial and otherwise, that this would bring to the town. And after some consultation with the DPW director and town planner, we felt that this was just a little early to adopt, and that it needed to first be given a full deliberation process with the planning board, et cetera. Mr. Stillwater, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand that process. If you could go into just a little bit more detail there, because I know that we just have a brand new stretch code that the town is having to digest, and it doesn't sound like that's been problematic at all. So I'm not understanding why this, which is compared to the new stretch code, would be a very small additional effort. Why it's raising red flags for you?
Alana, I can
Yep.
comment on that.
Go ahead, Gavin.
So I mean, we have, as FinCom, we're not experts in the building code. So we had to come, and I'm speaking personally here. So I personally had to come to the best decision under a lot of uncertainty as to the impact. And I felt like while the goal is promising, the impacts to our town are still very much unknown. And I think to really get comfortable with the level of risk to our town, there would have to be like a detailed conversation with the building inspector, DPW, more so than was allowed in the time between this article was given and the time we have to vote on town meeting. So I would say like I would be against this for the entire future. I just think it's too soon right now because we haven't done a full assessment of the impact. And the reason I'm concerned about this risk is because Maynard is a very small town that has that does not have that has to rely a lot on a very few number of staff. And just generally speaking, again, it has to be a detailed conversation with the building inspector. I felt like, to accomplish this goal would be too much of a burden to drop on our town staff on relatively short notice without knowing if they could actually handle it. So I was primarily concerned that we have a small number of town staff. We may not even have the expertise to enforce it. I just want to make sure that we have the town staff in place that we could actually do this article justice and actually enforce it in a feasible way, instead of just passing it and then not enforcing it at all.
Let me respond to several things you raised there. First of all, this applies only to new buildings, and the town has very few empty plots on which to build. So the impact is pretty small. I mean, it'd be tear downs that would be primarily impacted with this. Secondly, before I put it up, I had a long conversation with the building inspector, and he said he was happy to see it because it mandates these HERS levels, and those are other inspectors that come out that the builder has to pay for to come out to certify that the building actually meets those standards. So it makes his job easier. So he said he was happy to see it. And, you know, Boston has passed it, Acton, just this past week, Concord has. So, you know, other communities around are saying it's, you know, we want to see, we want to address the climate crisis as quickly as we can. I mean, and I think that's general, as I've walked around town, talking to people about this and handing out brochures and stuff, the overall response has been, we need to do something about climate change. This is largely a symbolic gesture. I mean, it does have some teeth to it, but it's largely a symbolic gesture, but it's moving us in the right direction. And it is encouraging the state to move more aggressively on climate related initiatives.
You asked a fair
Alana,
question about, you asked a fair question about why the FinCom voted to not recommend this. In some, it was because we don't understand the financial impacts. It's not clear. And so we're voting not to recommend. I think if you feel strongly that this ought to be adopted, I think that it's already been pointed out that place to start is to go to the planning department, the planning board, and get support there. And they would be able to then put it forward with a recommendation of how the town would manage this stretch code and enforce it. I realize you'd like it to be done right away, but that's where the FinCom came down in its vote.
Can I weigh in too,
Peter? Yeah,
Alana?
go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, the other thing I would just note is that for changes to building codes and zoning and things like that, I don't think citizens petitions at town meeting are the appropriate vehicle unless there's been, you know, some concerted effort over 2 or 3 years, and then you're coming to town meeting saying, I really think we should do this. The planning board has said no, and therefore that's why I'm coming to town meeting. Citizens petitions don't get the same vetting process, and as a FinCom member, I'm just uncomfortable supporting them generally unless there's some, you know, demonstrated need that the town has not been willing to adopt something that we should. It's not that they don't have a place, or, you know, if there's a dispute about the budget, I think some of the budget items this town meeting are perfectly appropriate. There's been a long discussion and there's contention, and town meeting should decide that. But to put something like this on as a citizen's petition, I think you're doing an end run around the review process, and the review process is very valuable. So that's part of why I voted not to recommend this.
Well, this is not a typical citizens initiative. In other words, I didn't write it. This is something written by DOER, and they're putting it out in the States. And, you know, we're hoping to have by the end of the year, we've got around 20% of the population now today covered by this. They voted to adopt this. And, you know, we're trying to build up momentum to get more and more communities into this, and it's all in response.
All
to
of
the
which I
climate
would
change.
support, but I would do it through the regular process, not a citizen's petition. Yeah, I'm not sure there's a lot more to add here. I get your point, but
I'm gonna yield the floor to Glenn. He has his hand up.
Sorry, I had to unmute.
That's okay.
I just wanted to, so this is for all buildings in town, not just the town buildings, I understand. And I'm familiar with the HERS inspector system because one of my clients in my work doing database work is somebody who does that. So I have a pretty good idea of what that involves. And I can see the points. I've been listening carefully to the argument here tonight. And I think there on one side is this sense of urgency in general about things that impact climate change. On the other side is a wish to go through normal procedures. And that's a tough dilemma at this point. And I'm just hoping that it doesn't blow up at town meeting and we have some way of assuring the members who show up at town meeting that there is a concerted effort to move forward in this area and to show evidence of that effort somehow, so that people have some kind of trust that government isn't moving too slowly on this particular kind of issue.
So
Okay.
can I respond, Alana, a little bit?
Sure, Gavin, go ahead.
So yeah, I fully appreciate the urgency. I also have concerns with this article about the environmental justice. Maynard is very much a small working class community surrounded by upper middle class communities. It is my personal feeling that it's an unfair burden on our town, which does not have the resources to do these building codes justice. Is an unfair burden on our town to be the first movers on this. I think it is the responsibilities of the town with the towns with the resources to do so, like the Actons, the Concords, the Bostons of the world, to be the first movers, to move quickly on this. And then once once they move forward on this and we can see the impacts, then we can go on. But I'm really concerned that, we're not a rich town that has a lot of town staff or a lot of resources that could really do this right or to do this justice.
Okay.
Thank you.
I guess my original comment still holds, of course, that if you're waiting for experience from other municipalities, that needs to be stated at town meeting. And I think there needs to be some kind of way to say, here's our general future time frame on this, so that people know that we're not just waiting indefinitely. I'm not aware of all the towns that have done it and haven't, so I don't have a list in front of me. But clearly, I think that's what the thirst, so to speak, at town meeting is going to be, is like, okay, you're saying no. How long is it going to take before you say yes? And what are the milestones that you have to cover before we can say yes? And to lay that out as much as you can.
So I can only speak to this as a single member. But I'd be willing to change my position between now and say citizens petition for special town meeting, provided, people, town staff and the planning board were made aware and there was discussion with the experts on this. So that's what's missing right now. That's blocking me from being a yes on this, is the need for an expert discussion with the people in town that actually have to implement this.
Okay, so in other words, the progress might be that the town meeting members ask the planning board, what's their plan?
Sure.
And finance committee stands back and says, okay, we need them to take their actions, and then we'll be on board with it. Is that kind of what you're saying?
In my personal capacity as a single member, that is my
Okay.
personal opinion.
Just to explain, Glenn, our responsibility is to explain to town meeting voters the financial and other impacts of the articles that are on the warrant. We don't
Right.
place articles on the warrant. Other people place it on there, in this case, through
Yes.
citizens petition. Okay, we're not sitting here advocating one way or the other as much as we are explaining what the impacts are and making recommendations about it. And
Okay.
and there are, as Peter said, there are appropriate ways to go through and push this forward.
Okay,
Oh.
yeah, and my point is just that whenever you say no, you should also have a way to say yes for what, in other words, I never like to see a no parking sign that doesn't also have a sign that says parking is available over here, okay? And so that, I think we don't want to be in a position where we put up the no parking sign and we don't, maybe, and I know it's not, as you say, it's not the finance committee's job to do that, but if there's some way at town meetings so that the people who you think do have that job state clearly what their procedure is going to be to make this come to fruition.
And that's what Peter was trying to convey. It's not through a citizen's petition. This goes before the town, through the planning board, through the Board of Selectmen who put this on to put it in as a planning and zoning bylaw change.
Ken,
Okay,
you keep, you keep.
No, Mr. Stillwater, please hold on. I'm gonna let Jillian, who's had her hand raised and is a finance committee member, speak. Go ahead, Jillian.
Hi, thanks. I think another way to maybe say this is that if you go through the planning board or other such committees who normally deal with these types of codes, it could also get their buy-in at the same time. So it could also be very beneficial. So it could give them a sense of ownership as well. So I think having that discussion with them could greatly benefit this article. And I think it's also important to remember at the end of the day, we as a committee can only recommend what we're presented in writing. It's not up to us to propose or read around the margins or whatever you want to call it, what this article could look like. We sort of suggest or recommend to the town based on what we are presented, what the potential impacts might be. And just because we recommend no, doesn't mean that the town isn't going to vote. And the end of the day, it's the town people's vote that carries or strikes down articles. So I think that's also
Right.
important to think of as well.
Thanks, Jillian. Okay, if there's anything new to add, any other comments or
Yeah.
questions?
Yeah,
Mr. Stillwater, go ahead if you have some new information or
yes, I do.
go ahead.
You refer to this as a citizen's petition, but it's been part of a lengthy process with DOER that first promulgated the stretch code, and there were a lot of folks unhappy that the stretch code didn't go far enough. There were a lot of hearings and public hearings, and this new opt-in stretch code is a result of that. Now, I'm assuming that you know, the planning committee and the planning board, I'm get my terms confused there, but have been following those important discussions and this process of creating this document, and may have had input into the document. So for them to say, oh, we've got to study it, this is something that's been coming for quite a while. So how come they don't know?
Mr. Stillwater, I'm not speaking for the planning board. I'm speaking for the finance committee. We did not receive anything from the planning board about this. We received your citizens petition. We looked it over. We asked for some consultation with the DPW director, the town planner, and the the building inspector. I heard back from the DPW director and the town planner. We put their emails on our board docs as part of our meetings to discuss. And through that process, our recommendation was that we were not ready to say yes to this.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Natasha, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that by nature that the state approved this as an opt-in versus statutory legal effective January 1, 2024 kind of mandate assumes that they would want towns to make planning efforts based on what, that's how I interpret that to mean, those type of laws that pass, that you need to take that and there needs to be deliberation within your town to see what's best for your municipality, taking into account your buildings, your needs, all of the things that I think FinCom has raised, to make sure that the success of implementation is one that's thoughtful and not that it's forced at the state level. So I just think that perspective, because they do have the right at the state level to force things to be implemented at a certain point, but that's not what they chose with this effort. It was to give towns, municipalities the time to opt in when they were able to at that point. So I think I appreciate the FinCom's approach to that. Thank you.
Thanks. And yes, I do agree. I believe the town planner said he assumes this is coming down as at some point will be the law of the land. All right. I still see your hand up.
Oh.
Mr. Do you still, okay, just checking. Article 35, amend zoning bylaw. Mixed use, multifamily, reduced area requirement. So this article is being brought forward by the planning board. And this is a revision to help bring some more affordable housing by granting some density bonuses in the downtown overlay district. So it only changes some of the framework in that specific district. You can check out the zoning maps if you're not wholly familiar with where that district is. And FinCom voted to recommend this article. Are there questions or comments? Okay. Article 36 is a zoning bylaw amendment. This one has to do with body art establishments. This is basically removing some of older practices. The planning board felt that when this bylaw initially went in, body art establishments had only newly been legal in the state, and they have since become relatively seen in other towns. We asked them if there was specifically a establishment that was looking to come in for this. They said, no, this is just proactive, and it only gives by right the ability for a body art establishment to go into the business district, the central business district, and the healthcare industrial district. It is still not allowed, obviously, in any residential districts, and it's by planning board approval in the industrial district. Any questions or comments on this article? Okay. Article 37, another zoning bylaw. This, you can see the changes that are made here in the table. And this one, I'm getting my zoning bylaws confused. Hold on. Let me go down to the comments.
I don't blame you.
This is a big one. Yeah, no, this is a bigger one.
This is
Because they put the whole, they
this
have
is
the
the
whole
whole-
bylaw in there.
This is the home-based,
Right.
home-based activities,
Yeah, so
accessory.
yes, so this is this the one establishing the A and the B?
Correct.
Type A, type B, right. Okay, so this is one they've been working on a while concerning home-based businesses and putting them into different categories, into ones that require approval and ones that are allowed, and in terms of parking requirements and things like that. So after speaking with the chair of the planning board, the finance committee voted to recommend this article. Any comments or questions on this one? Okay. Article 38 is a zoning bylaw for business use for trade shop and definitions. This is adding a new trade shop into the bylaw for where it can be put in by right, which is the Y that you see there, where it is not allowed, which is the N in the residential districts. And then there's one, the BA, that's by a board approval in the healthcare industrial district. And a trade shop definition, building structure or premises used by a practitioner of a trade or a craft.
is this, so you're saying, is this like in, residential use, like self-employment?
This one is not. This one is only for the business, the central business and the industrial. So this is not a home-based business. This is more of an actual, physical building that is used for the trade.
And we didn't have this before? In those zones?
We didn't have this use of the word and the definition
Oh,
of trade shop.
okay, and then is that, I didn't see, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I didn't see, let me go to the page where it is in my book here.
Mhm.
So does it explain what that means in here?
It's pretty loose. I mean, the trade shop definition here is just a building, structure, or premises used by a practitioner of a trade or craft.
Okay. All right, so they could do glass blowing or something,
Yeah, I believe what we didn't have it as a primary use. I believe it was used elsewhere as like a secondary use, like if you had a home-based type of workshop.
right.
This is a standalone, this is all it's for type. And
Okay,
so therefore is only allowed in the business, central district and industrial.
but yeah, that seems kind of like those are the places you'd want it, kind of a
Right,
no-brainer in
exactly.
that sense. Okay, all right, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions or comments? That's it. There are the signatures. Hooray. Thank you all so much for going through, and I lost count, 38? 38 articles with us this evening. We appreciate your participation and are excited to share it all with you at town meeting. And we hope you found this helpful. And with that, I will close the public hearing portion of
You'll
the
need to
evening.
take a vote,
Yeah.
make a motion that we close the public hearing.
All right. Do I have a second?
I second the motion.
Kevin seconds. And we'll do a roll call vote. Ken,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Peter,
Yes.
Katie,
Yes.
Khadijah,
Yes.
Jillian,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well. But we do hope that you will stick around. We have more for you. We are going to be giving a little presentation at this time from the Finance Committee to further explain some of what we've been talking about and where we think things are going with the town. So let me pull that up and we will go through that. Oh, now sorry. I had it up and then I closed it. Too many windows. Bear with me. Okay. And then share my screen here. All right, and part of our reason for doing this here is because town meeting is going to be rather long with all of those articles. So we thought we would share it here. We're going to post this on our website. It is already up on Board Docs. Oh, I somehow closed it. Let me go back to slideshow. What are you doing, PowerPoint? Slideshow. Okay, sorry, hold on. Let me try this again. I think my PowerPoint just decided to fail. one more time. Here we go. Okay. Is that coming up? Hopefully. So here we go.
Correct.
Let me get this out of there. All right. So what we want to talk about tonight is some of the things we have been talking about in our meetings and hopefully try to bring a little more clarity to some of the topics. And if you have questions, go ahead and ask them. I'm not going to be looking at everybody while I present, but so one of the big things, expenses are outpacing revenue growth. This is kind of part of what we've been talking about tonight, in particular with the school department, but that's certainly not the only one impacted. Much as we've talked about special education costs going up, there's also been, certainly everyone feels it in their own personal budget, the increase in inflation, things costing more for our DPW and things of that nature. So this is something that is a problem that we are looking at. So we have tried as best we can to manage this balance by minimizing expense increases, by, keeping our expenses as low as possible. But that is really coming to a point where we can't sustain much. We are having trouble without cutting services to maintain a balanced budget. And we'd like to discuss and prioritize needs in several years ahead. For example, we have a lot of larger expenses that are coming. We just funded the fire station, as everyone knows, but we also have the Green Meadow School Building project. We have the needs from the seniors for a better senior center. We have water and sewer needs. And so the question is, how can we pay for all of these? And what is it really going to cost? And, what do we do? And so there's two ways of doing that. You can cut other things to pay for things, or you can raise your revenue to pay for things. So how would we raise more revenue? The options are Prop 2.5 override. If you're not aware of what that means, we have every year the ability to raise our taxes by 2.5% plus new growth. And anything above that needs to be voted on doing, because the town cannot just go ahead and do that. We have business growth and residential growth that increases our tax base. State aid increases, which we don't really have any control over. And sometimes they don't increase, sometimes they decrease. And we also have some local receipt increases that would be some fees and things that we could increase to gain more for local receipts. And then, of course, when we talk about all these things, we have to talk about how that plan would be implemented and what its impact would be on our families in town. Okay, so we had some questions. What's most effective for raising revenue and controlling expenses? What tools can we use to study our scenarios and see things more clearly? Also, what we can watch for capital planning and funding, and how can budget choices and impacts be effectively communicated to all community stakeholders? We want to make sure that we have a good foundation of understanding when we come to town meeting for certain asks that we have. This slide is just to let you know, if you're unaware, mass.gov has a lot of resources, one of which the Department of Local Services has a ton of tools. If you want to geek out on municipal finance, and who doesn't, I highly recommend you go to check out DLS, because they have some really, really neat things in there and a lot of data. So path forward, looking into not just FY24 and 25, but ahead of that. We want to make economic development a priority for our town. As was already mentioned in one of our conversations tonight, we don't have a lot of space. We have 5 square miles, and it's already relatively densely packed and or under conservation. So we don't have unlimited resources to develop. We'll need to establish clear and realistic long-term financial planning. We have been working on doing, projections and budgeting farther than just, how do we get through this year? How do we make a balanced budget for this coming fiscal year, but looking beyond? And also align with various townwide stakeholders before ATM and STM to communicate budget decisions. This is, very important. We have been working towards more communication and more collaboration with our major boards. We also have been amping up participation with boards like the Capital Planning Committee, so that everybody can, put in their 2 cents, and we can make sure that we are, more united fronts moving forward. So we talk about a Maynard financial model. What this is good for is looking back and looking forward. Looking back, it's been an interesting few years, certainly with COVID. A lot of our budgeting scenarios and planning kind of went out the window for a bit there while we were all just trying to figure that out. But hopefully, and also looking back now, some of our past couple of years are a little skewed by that. Again, it was brought up tonight, the way that COVID impacted the school's budget, and also things like our benefits. There's been, things are not as easy to look back in the last couple of years and predict forward, because things were thrown into a little bit of chaos with the pandemic. But still, it's not, all is not lost. It is still good to have and move forward with. So what we do with the financial model is looking at some scenarios. And we look at the main, there is a lot in the model. When we'll show a little bit of it later. But generally what you're looking at is main expense drivers, budget drivers, revenue sources. We're, for the most part, getting into, things that are gonna affect a couple $1,000s here or there isn't really what you plan your scenarios on. But for main revenue sources, we have real estate tax, and for Maynard, it is very much mostly residential. And then we have new growth, which is what we're allowed to build to tax on beyond the Prop 2.5. And then local aid for schools, and we get some for Chapter 90 for roads for the DPW and things of that nature. And then we have expense categories that I think are in the next slide. And so part of what we do with the modeling is what happens when we, are to change some of these scenarios or some of these big sources and drivers. What does it do to the future scenario? We also have a lot of capital and water sewer planning to do. Unfortunately, we've had in the past some, I would say, not the best practices in place for some of our infrastructure needs. So we are hoping to be able to be more proactive, less reactive. And how do we do that? We have to know the cost and prioritize plans, and then we need to forecast in the future, know what we need, and make sure that fees and fund balances, stabilization funds, and things of that nature are going to be there for us to do what it is we need to do. So this is very small, and I apologize, and I am not expecting anyone to actually look at a lot of these numbers. This is more just to give you an idea of what the financial model looks like, how it functions. This one is revenue, and the year it starts with FY19, and then we can project forward. And when we talk about looking at different scenarios, what we're talking about is changing some of these rows here and seeing what that does to the overall surplus or deficit. So, so this is budget, this tool is for budget history and then also future. So examples of features in the tool, we can look at how we balance the budget in the past. And then we can look at revenue history and trends to help inform our future projections. And we have at the top of the model, you can see in the future, are we at a deficit if we do such and such? Are we at a, do we have extra? That would be great. And then also we can do, we have some bolded subtotals for real estate tax revenue. And we can see the trends in like local aid and local receipts that we can help build into the future. So if we notice, for example, net local aid is relatively flat, then we're not going to build into the model that it increases by, 10% a year, because that's not helpful. And this way we can sort of look at more optimistic or conservative, projections based on what we think. So if you look at one thing that we found is the bit of bump in FY22, and this is one of our models for FY24.
You can click one more time.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, I know there's more on that. So we had a 5.8% increase in FY22, which was a bump up from previous, and mostly due to revenue growth. And so one thing that you can use with these models and look at is, well, is that the new normal? Is that what we base on, or is that an outlier, and why was it? And things of that nature. So, and then we build off certain scenarios and find, again, that FY22 revenue bump as an outlier, but could that be, something that becomes something we would need in order to have a balanced budget because of that? And then how do you account for that? And where does, when you don't get that bump, what are you going to do? So right now we're estimating, just 250,000 in FY24 for new growth. So again, that's quite a bit lower. And we're also looking at charter school and school choice assessments, because those have been a consideration in terms of, revenue that we have to pay, or expenses that's eating at the revenue. So again, this is really small. You can look at it in more detail if you want to grab this off our board docs and shortly our website. But this just shows you the revenue with previous 5 years and some of those things we were just talking about with charter school right here in school choice and how much they have increased. And then we had new real estate tax growth of 650,000, which was again, an outlier and won't continue, but what if it could?
Yeah, if I could just add one comment. there.
Sure.
So this is a projection that pretty much is a conservative increase based on the TA recommended budget. It's called A2. That's just it doesn't mean anything specific, but it is the budget that we're voting on. And
Right.
if we look at those modest projections, which aren't enough to keep level service for the schools, admittedly, what it kind of says is that if you go that way in FY28, your quote deficit, the amount you need to make up to keep on this track is about 650,000. Now that's just a scenario, but it does say if we continually get new growth or any other means of new revenue, we would be able to keep track about at this level. I mean, pluses or minuses, but it gives you an idea of what you're shooting for. And that's why we talked about, what do we need to fund? And if level service is much more than that, that's what in this presentation is D2, you're going to have to raise a lot more revenue than 650,000. Okay.
Thank you, Bob. And I'm sorry, I meant at the beginning of this presentation to say that our former FinCom member, Bob McCarthy, has been very instrumental, as well as some help from our select board elect, Mike Stevens, for this presentation. So I want to thank them both for their help with this as we were getting ready and for annual town meeting. And it's quite a busy time. So I really appreciate those two putting in some effort to help make this presentation possible. So FY24 TA recommended balanced budget, expense budget. This is what we were just saying is in the A2 scenario. And this is just to show you sort of graphically where everything is going. And then our top 8 operating expense drivers for the next scenario, scenario D2. By rank, and as you saw too in that previous slide, the Maynard Education is the largest, and then employee benefits, and so on and so forth. Natasha, go ahead. I see you raised your hand.
Yeah, I was wondering, the way I read this would be more that they're departments versus the drivers that are, when I think about like expense drivers, like what are, like you talked earlier about inflation, those type of things. These are just more like categorizing the departments by expense, right? Which is kind of like just a list version of the pie chart you had, right?
Yeah, it's right. I see what you're saying. And this is about, these are the larger pieces of the pie. Yeah. So maybe not so much expense drivers, but when you're looking at the scenarios and you're changing certain things, these would be the ones that are really going to affect that outcome that we were talking about on the upper right. So, if something were to change, with the larger of them, certainly you're going to affect your outcome much quicker.
Can I elaborate a little bit, Alana?
Sure, go ahead, Kevin.
So, I mean, the reason we're doing this ranking is that if we say wanted to adjust employee benefits or one of these large items, it really, like, our priority should not be on a department that has like a $50,000 budget. The priority of things that we should look at if we want to move money around between like a large item is another large item. So that, say, we're not looking at public safety and looking to like increase public safety funding by looking at something like the cemetery or culture and recreation.
Right. So I think this is sort of touching on what we were just talking about. So in scenario D2, we're changing Maynard Public Schools expense budget and seeing what, what we would need to do that. And as Bob had alluded to, when you change one of the large budget pieces without compensating elsewhere, you end up with, quite a deficit that we need to make up in revenue. So this is a look at what may happen in terms of increasing that. If we increase the school budget, what that does moving forward without, any compensation, which obviously we couldn't do because you need a balanced budget. But this is just how you can sort of change a number in the model and then see what it does moving forward. And so in this example, if you start FY24 with the article for increased school budget and don't, that's all, then you can see that by FY28 we would be.
You can go to the next slide and it's much easier to read.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Thanks, Bob. Right.
Sure.
Thank you for reminding me of that.
Yeah.
So here you go. You can see where you change, that one item and then what it does moving forward. We've got, 2 million plus of a deficit to overcome, which would be in increased revenue in some way, like an override.
So I just point out that the increase that is asked for in the warrant article would mean a 4.9, maybe call it 5% increase over 2023. So we wouldn't maintain that high level in this budget scenario. We're trying to say, okay, you got to bump up, and now future years, maybe you don't need quite as much in percentage, because by dollars, that's still, in the 500 to 1.5 million, which, to Kevin's point before, is kind of an order of magnitude more than the culture and recreation budget, So percentages don't tell the whole story. And it says that in a couple more slides, but I think that's the cautionary tale here.
Mm-hmm. So, right. So here's a graph version, and it shows you if we increase, if Maynard Public Schools increases about 4%, how it would grow.
So that's a total 8 million over the 4 years that were just discussed. That's how much more, many more dollars are added to the school budget.
Right. And then, of course, you have to talk about the other costs of that, which would be employee benefits, et cetera.
There's a little graph there. If you click one more.
One more. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, so that one's not updated because we don't have anybody in the finance department that could do it yet. But it's just to recognize that there are indirect costs. We called them accommodated costs in town finance parlance. But it is in that range, and it's been in that range for quite a while. Most of it employee benefits.
Right. And so now we're talking about employee benefits, which is also, as we just said, one of the other large items. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to.
Yeah, it's probably easy enough. People get the idea. You don't need to bring it home, but there are a couple more takeaways.
Okay. So we can look at increased totals by dollars as well as percentages, because as we were saying, you know, percentages are helpful in some ways, not helpful in others. Dollar amounts the same, and so we, by rank, we were looking at top 4 categories and these percentage increases and how much that would mean for the dollar amounts. But again, you know, employee benefits increase at 6, that can be more or less of what we actually end up needing. Some of these are more in our control. I hate to use that word, than others. And so this is some graph versions of that so that you can
One more
see.
click for this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So these are all on the same scale. And so you can see why, you know, education expenses make such a large difference overall than when you're talking about some of the smaller departments. Okay. Bob, you want to help me out on this one a little bit?
Yeah, I guess I would just ask, does anybody have any questions on, because this switches now from the operating budget to capital and other things. Any other questions, comments on the preceding revenue and expense explanation? Okay.
All right, let's move on to capital.
Sure. So click again a couple times, I think. So I apologize. I got this straight raw from the capital planning committee.
Right.
And the next slide is going to be almost readable in terms of what it's showing, but it starts with talking about excluded debt, and that means a temporary, borrowing, usually bonding of a building or some other big item. And by state law, you do not have to include that in your Prop 2.5 accounting. So it allows you to raise money to build capital, infrastructure. And while your operating budget is not capped with this, you still must cover the principal and interest, as we've talked about in a lot of issues tonight, for debt service. And that's by, again, what you can raise in taxes typically, mostly. So if you click again to the next slide, well, yeah, so the whole thing is, it's been going down. Our debt service has been declining, as it should be, right? You've had a lot of years on some, the Fowler School of the high school. As it declines, you have opportunity, to stay within some level servicing amount to raise more. And we plan to do that. We have a lot of things on the docket, but many more than just the 3 or 4 things we mentioned: senior center, Green Meadow School, water treatment, and that kind of thing. But all of those, as we pay them off, will raise our tax. So part of the questions raised here are, what is affordable to, for the town's taxpayer? If you go to the next slide, one more, keep going.
Yep.
Now, if you do those double clicks, you can almost read that, if you transition and immediately start doing some of these, and we're not saying this is the plan. I have to overemphasize that for the capital planning committee. They have a template, they have a tool, but this hasn't been vetted with exactly when you would issue debt for, say, the Green Meadow School building. But if you did, you'd be going from about $2 million to about $4.5 million in debt service. For the additional ones on the second, where that arrow is down, you would be adding, quite a bit more money to what is already being issued before. Everybody get that? So there's a little bit more in the appendix about capital planning.
Yeah.
I think we need to weigh in a lot more heavily, because the one in the appendix that I didn't include, just for simplicity's sake, has unfunded, needs over the course of the next number of years beyond these. There's quite a bit on that list, and we struggle with finding, anything but free cash to do it year after year after year. So some things that are prioritized, that you might want to know why we might say it's a great idea to do one or another thing, but we've already got 5 or 6 things in line ahead of it for sometimes safety reasons, sometimes for cost avoidance in the future. So a couple more, can we go through just 2 more slides for questions, Natasha? Would that be okay? Because we're almost done. Okay.
No worries.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
So, looking back to some essential questions, what are the most effective ways to raise revenue and control expenses? What tools can we use to study the budget scenarios, short-term and long-term? And how can budget questions and decisions be effectively communicated to our stakeholders? So these are the things that we are looking to work on, and the tool that we have right now is one of those things for looking at scenarios. It's not the only one. And as Bob talked about in that last slide, just what the capital planning is using as well. So that's part of making sure that communication and everything between different committees and stakeholders, are working together to see. And I'm, hopeful. I really think that some of these things that we can put in place would be great, because we can get, the input from the various committees and say, okay, well, we know we need this. What year, when does it look like it makes the most sense to hopefully be able to do that with the least, amount of hardship on our taxpayers, in terms of when debt rolls off, when we take on new, and things of that nature.
And that's for the people beyond the people on the downtown communities and whatever. We need
Right.
the voting stakeholders to help us, figure out what is the best way to get the message out to them, and what are they looking for? How much is too much? This might be too much, it might be too little.
So what are some goals we can talk about? Speaking in terms of increasing revenue sustainability, choose maybe 3 to 5 actionable areas to start with. And then again, prioritize and finding highest revenue increase potential. Because as we talked about with expenses and which ones that you get the most sort of bang for your buck with, you don't want to be focusing too hard and too much energy on things that are really not going to move the needle. Some kickoffs. Yeah.
I think this point that you just made, is incredibly important. We have to take action. We have to take action now. It has to be action that's going to move the needle a considerable amount. And this cannot be small stuff. It's got to be, significant revenue resources, because we cannot balance the budget just by, making adjustments to, to the expense side. So, this I think is incredibly important.
And this is actually something that we're, putting into our town charter, making a long-term financial model and planning for a 5-year plan. And then, of course, aligning various town stakeholders before annual town meeting to communicate these decisions, and making sure that everybody understands the goals, not only in the near term, but in the far term. And again, trying to make sure that we are being more proactive than reactive. So now, well, first of all, I do want to let you all know there is a lot more in this presentation in the form of appendix. So again, please, I'm not going to go through all of these, but there's a lot there. So feel free to go through that. And if you have any further questions beyond, like when you have done that, and you want to ask, please send an email to FinCom or come to a future meeting. Natasha, go ahead.
Question about the senior center idea. I know in the earlier part of the presentation, it looked like it was like to discuss priorities under the current challenges. And then when we get to the area of capital planning and forecasting and looking ahead for different major projects, it wasn't explicitly listed there. And I'm wondering, is that an opportunity? Or because it makes it look like you're looking at up to FY20, FY30, and it doesn't have it listed under a debt exclusion capital project there. And I don't know that there's a number yet to it, but
I think that, yeah, if you, the slide with the sort of like beige, the capital
it has
planning
the capital
model.
planning, yeah, it has
Yeah.
like the school, the bleachers, yeah.
I think that's because that is based on what they have as what they currently have as projects in their database, and the senior center is, as of right now, doesn't have a specific ask and place in that model.
And Greg may our input on this, but I would just add to that I got this from John Lochran, who is a member of the committee, and this information for this next fiscal year has been vetted. The rest of it is in the tool, looking for a home to fund, frankly, and is not meant to suggest this is the plan. I did say it before, but I should emphasize it one more time. But it is to let you know that, just like with the operating budget, if you plug numbers in and then extrapolate, you get an idea of what you can afford and what would be a proper way to stage projects like that without having your debt service become high enough that, you know, your bond rating could suffer. There's a lot of things like that. But so just look at it as a way to organize the information, and that it's being done by a group in a much more explicit way than it was being done in the recent past.
Right.
Yeah, no, I know that their sheets are fantastic that they're doing. Thinking about the outward, how we want that community input and to process it. I was wondering if there's maybe even a line that says not factored, but all like there's not a request in, but it's just an acknowledgement, because there is something at the beginning of the presentation that says these are things, but then when you, even though it's not necessarily have a number to it, I think it's kind of the elephant in the room. That
of about 25 elephants. Maybe,
right, but it's also like a building, you know, or such that it's a larger, it's going to be a question I think would be unavoidable for anyone, you know, to like, what about that? And how would you answer that?
That's a good question to the team. I mean, how will we answer it? Yeah.
Agreed. I mean, I think part of what this is helping us do is look at where we have gaps of knowledge like that. And also, you know, when you look at what is already in there and the jump in debt service that we're looking at, you know, okay, well, what if you also add this? You know, that's the kind of thing that we're looking to do for sure.
Thank you very much.
By the way, Natasha, this isn't a presentation for town meeting, but it will be available for people to look. And you're right, the question still could come up when they talk about budget.
Well, that's what I was thinking, is that it's more like, you know, you kind of teed it up with some context, you know, but anyone who just goes and looks at it without that additional explanatory measure, like this is not everything, might read it as just like it's some FinCom representation of what there's on their radar right now, and not realizing that the variables that are still aware, but we don't have more information, are not even incorporated in there as well, but they're still known.
So I don't know, is that FinCom's, or how would that happen? Just because it's a really valid point. And I have heard enough scuttlebutt in the, you know, town, you know, sidewalks, you know, about that. So maybe you invite the capital planning committee to talk a little bit about where that fits or not, or maybe you've been to some of those meetings, Greg. Would you have any advice on how to tee that up so it doesn't become contentious.
No, I think the capital planning committee is the appropriate approach. Like that's their charge.
Yeah.
So
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you all for that and again, look through it some more and the appendix and send me an email if you have any questions, fincom@townofmaynard.net, or come to one of our meetings. This is not like this is a working process, right? And we're working on all of these models and things, and this is not just here it is. So this is definitely a fluid work in progress. And so with that, we are going to move on in our agenda, which is some housekeeping things. We have minutes, and also we need to approve our last 3 comments that we have for town meeting.
I'm signing off. Bye.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for being here.
I'm going too. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks.
Whatever feedback about how to make that presentation better, we're going to try to do more of them, I hope, in the future, right? So
Sure. Yeah.
go to Alana.
I got it.
As always, thank you, Bob.
Yeah,
Yes,
you're
thank
entirely
you.
welcome. And I will have to say, it's more than just Mike Stevens. Jack McKean gave me some input. Jillian was instrumental in some of the graphing and ideas. So it's a team effort.
Thank you. I'm joining the Exodus as well, but thank you.
You're so welcome.
Actually, some of it came from Glenn. I have to mention, you're going to see his face around a whole lot more, and he gave me some feedback.
Oh, wonderful.
Future presentations. It came a little late, but still, it seemed valuable. So thanks.
Thank you for that acknowledgement. And I'm gonna have to do the my dinner part 2, which never got done when I came online. So I'm gonna step aside as well at this point. Yeah, because I've been working pretty hard the last couple of weeks doing the townwide mall news feed, and I had to kind of get a day of rest in there somewhere.
All right, folks.
Okay.
Have a good time. All right.
All right. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
So let me pull up one of the article. Comments that we have here. Oh. Where did it go? All right, so we got from Ken and Kevin, thank you, the comments for article for the free cash. So did we have thoughts, any requests, changes? Is this good? Again, for comments, we don't need a formal vote or anything. I just want to make sure everyone feels comfortable and is on the same page.
I was not there last week, but read it and had a good understanding of the conversation you had. So,
good.
So I thought it was well written.
Anyone else? That seem good?
I'm not a huge fan of the word unfortunately, but
okay.
I don't think it's a big deal breaker.
Mm-hmm. I don't think if we just started with this proposed appropriation takes too much away. Kevin, would you be?
So the problem is that you know, the way I tend to write these things is to start off by saying to town meeting voters, passage of this article does this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now maybe there's some other word in there, but the next sentence is not good news. And it flies sort of in the face of this. Okay, it's $2 million of free cash, of certified free cash. Good news. You got $2 million to spend. Unfortunately, some of that came out from the circuit breaker funds. And so that's the reason why I put that. I'm not strong on the use of unfortunate, but I do want to point out that even though the first sentence is a positive one overall, the rest of the news in this is not good. So somebody has a different way of putting it, that's fine.
Mm. Can't really
Getting
think of
out my,
anything off the cuff.
I'm getting out my thesaurus here. And the number one is sadly, which doesn't do
I
anything
mean,
better.
I see
And-
what you're saying. I think the fact that we don't, the FinCom recommendation does not recommend,
Well, I mean, we could start it out by saying, instead of saying unfortunately, we could sit there and say, the finance committee does not recommend passage because this proposed
Due to-
appropriation requires. So, you
Okay.
could
what
put
about,
that in there and say, the finance committee does not recommend passage.
I think that wording's a little bit more clear. It's explicit as opposed to implicit, communicating our intent.
Yep, it communicates feeling. It doesn't communicate feeling. I'm tired. It communicates the intent. Yep, exactly. Thanks.
any other comments, or we good on this one? Okay. And then let me pull up the others. So we had certified pre-cash, and then we had to do the budget. Article 6.
I thought you did a nice job on both these.
Thank you.
I think the one thing I guess I would say is, I think we ought to use consistently either FinCom or Finance Committee. Just,
Yeah, that's
just so it looks a little bit. And I don't know what you've used and what we've used in the other. Well, I have the warrant here. I guess we could pull that out.
I feel like normally we'll say Finance Committee once, and then the rest of it goes over to FinCom for just brevity's sake.
First couple I'm looking at says FinCom, so.
Oh, and
Since
one,
it says comments,
okay,
Finance Committee and parents. So I think it's fine saying FinCom.
okay.
I'm-
I did also want to say, for the warrant, we had talked about putting the vote count. And I had included that, with the comments that I had given, but I didn't explicitly tell, Greg, I call them the Gregs, that was an addition we had discussed adding, and so they just went to the normal, format, which did not include those. So that is why those aren't there. That's something for, discussion at a future town meetings if you want to have the vote counts listed in the warrant, in which case you just make sure that they know that that was purposeful.
So I'm fine with the first one if you,
Okay, anyone else, the town budget, Article 6 comments, thoughts, corrections, questions? Okay. Article 7.
so in the fourth line.
Yep.
So, it says you have general fund budget and you don't have it, you have it lowercase. I think I would have tended to make that, initial capital. Just because it is a
Oh,
specific
yeah.
budget so that they understand. It's not a
Right.
general fund, it's the general fund.
Right.
But
In light of tonight's comments, do we need to update this to say that the school's budget would be doubled based on
No.
Article 6 and 7? No, they're gonna amend it, right?
Yeah, I think we'll
I think
let
it's pretty
that
safe to say that we're
figure that out.
enough people are gonna be looking at this.
Alana, can I actually ask about that, the legal
Sure.
counsel thing?
Sure.
Did Greg send that to you? Or I saw the Lisa Mead thing on that's setting the tax rate, but not,
If he did, I feel like I missed
I
it.
just forwarded tonight.
Oh, okay.
Just because I don't see you were on one of the chains, but there were a couple that came in the past week. And Peter, we just got it May 4th. We
Yeah,
just
it
found out
doesn't.
about it.
Yeah. Thank you, Natasha. I'll forward that to the committee.
So it didn't leave a lot of
Okay.
time for anyone to respond or adjust.
Well, I think if you're going to put this forward, Natasha, I think you just put it forward in an amended.
Yeah,
amended
yeah, I think
fashion, so,
that's the plan. I just,
I mean, to me, it's just a matter of clarifying the language. It's, how many of us looked at that and nobody thought that, it was, that the intent was to double the budget, so.
Right. That's why you gotta have lawyers look at these things, I guess. They're
Well, I don't know.
sticklers.
It says in there level service budget. I'm not gonna quibble with a lawyer's interpretation on it, but
Right.
seemed pretty clear to me.
All right. So I think we're good on the comments. I will submit those.
So you're gonna want to coordinate with Greg on this in terms of what gets done. I know when I have done it, Peter may want to weigh in on, the way he did it, but when we had comments that were going to be presented at town meeting, I wrote it up, sent it to them, they made copies and inserted it in
Yeah.
to the warrant. So.
Yeah, that's,
but
I
would
believe
just-
what happened last time as well, but
Right,
I'll,
I would
yeah.
just make sure that you coordinate.
Yep.
With Greg, because there's been changeover and stuff in the town staff. And you just don't want it to get to the point where there's no handout there.
Right.
And, I think it's just three, right? that
It's
didn't
just
make
3,
it?
and then I'll put a little note in about our presentation that's available on the website for more context and information.
To me, it's a one, if you can get it on one page. And you may not, but
Yeah.
one page or one page front and back, then it's easy enough for them to copy it, put it in and stuff like that, so.
Yeah. All right. So then we need to do our minutes. Let me just share here. And thank you again to Jillian for writing these up for us this time.
Thank you, Jillian.
I don't know, Katie, I think Jillian's vying for your
I think she's
job.
gunning for it.
She did a really good job. I think
I
so.
know.
So are there any corrections or comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we accept minutes from April 24th.
All right, do I have a second?
Jill will second.
Okay. Then we'll do a roll call vote. Khadija,
Yes.
Ken,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Katie,
I'll abstain since I wasn't there.
okay, Peter,
Yes.
and Jillian.
Yes.
Excellent. All right. So I don't have too much else for chair news other than annual town meeting next Monday. I think I hope I forwarded the email, but there's already been some discussion about potentially extending it to another night should discussions go long. We have a meeting tomorrow with all the chairs and anyone presenting. We have a meeting with the town moderator ahead of the meeting to go through it. So I'm sure he'll elaborate on what that cutoff would be and whatnot. But Joe,
I frankly, I thought that the approach he used during COVID is an approach that he ought to use more often, and it made for a very good town meeting, very quick. Certainly allowed everybody to comment, and combining the articles together, particularly the routine ones. I
yeah.
don't understand why we wouldn't do that again.
I think there will be some of that, but it's just, it's more articles than we've had in the last few, I think, anyway. And I think he's just considering some of the ones that might need more discussion. Natasha, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, you just said something that I'm realizing. You said there's a meeting tomorrow with the chairs about.
I think it's tomorrow.
I haven't gotten anything, but I'm actually realizing I should have.
Sure,
and
I'll
maybe I got
I
lost in
don't
my inbox.
yeah, sure.
Though.
I don't know who was on this because it's BCC'd.
Oh, it's
so
one,
I'll
it's
just
one of those. Okay.
I'll send it to you.
Okay. Thank you.
So was that all the business that you had?
I think
Alana?
that's all I have.
So I think one thing that we need to discuss is, so town meeting is next week.
Yep.
We're off on the 22nd. We're meeting on the 30th.
Yes.
That puts us in June before we really meet for a regular meeting next time.
Yes.
And I think at some point we're going to have to talk about who's going to chair the finance committee starting July, starting in
Yes.
July. So it's not something we need to do tonight, but it's something that we need to do.
Certainly, I think our next meeting, I have June 12th would be the next meeting. And again, since we have town meeting next week, plus the tri-board meeting on the 30th, I was not planning to call, and that 29th is Memorial Day. So I was not planning to call another FinCom meeting in May. So June 12th would be our next one. And I think absolutely planning for the next fiscal year on the committee should be an agenda item. Any other committee members have updates?
Our next meeting is June 12th.
June 12th, yes.
All right, thanks.
Tri-board meeting, Alana, May
Yep,
30th?
May 30th.
Yeah.
Well,
Is
right.
that
So
what it
our
is?
next FinCom meeting is June 12th. But obviously next week we have ATM and then tri-board meeting May 30th.
It's still at 6:30. Is that right? It was at like a weird time, I thought. Just wanted to.
Oh, I'll have to go. That might have
I wanna
escaped my
just
attention.
just double check that. I think
Okay.
I remember something about wanting to start earlier, but maybe David couldn't start at 6, so yeah, it was, I think, at 6:30 unless they may change
Okay.
it, but
I will check in on that.
If there's nothing else, I will make a motion to adjourn.
Okey doke. Do I have a second?
I second it.
Oh, I'm gonna give it to Khadijah. And thank you all so much for
Need to take a vote.
well, yeah, hold on.
Okay.
I was gonna say my piece first and then let you go. Thank you
Everybody
so
will-
much for the
everybody's gonna duck out.
ATM prep, and we will see you next week at annual town meeting. And if you've never been there before, we sit up on the stage, so come on and find us. And have a great week, everyone. Thank you so much. So roll call vote: Khadijah,
Yes.
Ken,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Katie,
Yes.
Peter,
Yes.
Jillian,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well. Thank you all so much and have a good night.